Your potential as a creator is not born from your simplicity. It's born from your complexity, from your nuance, your contradiction, and your messiness. You see, as creators, as those of us who are starting businesses and writing books and launching movements, we are the modern day alchemists. Our job is to turn nothing into something. We allow ourselves to be used as the conduits for creation at scale. And so it only makes sense that we have access to some kind of potent power source, some internal engine that fuels our potential. And as we will come to understand, that fuel is our complexity. It's born from our ability to see our strengths and our struggles, our blessings and our burdens, our light and our dark, as all essential to our creative process. As this optical illusion demonstrates, we need both the light and the dark to see this creation in its wholeness. The Renaissance masters pioneered the style of painting, chiaroscuro, in which the interplay of light and dark was used to create depth and beauty and mystery and intrigue. And so too must we as creators use the play of our light and dark qualities to tap into our full potency, our full potentialities as creative beings. These were a few of the things that I started musing on a few years ago when I was working in venture capital. And my job was to meet with thousands of creators, from entrepreneurs to investors to corporate innovators to creatives. And because of my background in psychology and neuroscience, I was able to quickly pick up on a few patterns and trends in their way of being. The first thing that I was struck by was the power of their bright, light qualities. Like a moth to a flame, I was magnetized to their passion, their ambition, their risk tolerance, and other bright qualities that were so foundational to their work as creative beings. But in the same breath, I became aware of a darker side of their nature. It seemed as though each and every one of their light qualities went hand in hand with an equal and opposite dark complement, and that none of their strengths could truly be celebrated without a nod to the murkier elements that often sat just beneath the surface. I became aware of the depression, the distraction, the delusion, the addiction, the obsession, the perfectionism, imposter syndrome, mental health issues, stress-related illness, emotional dysregulation, existential angst, and generalized naughtiness that was so prevalent among creators. And while I was floored by the sheer depths of suffering I witnessed, I quickly came to realize that creators are just these wildly complex beings. They are high and low, optimistic and pessimistic, masculine and feminine, logical and creative, open-minded and critically minded, insanely productive and humorously unproductive, and other poles of experience that seem as though they shouldn't exist within the same being. And yet, when harnessed properly, this complexity and polarity seems to be the stuff of uninhibited creation. And it seemed as though these individuals were not self-selecting into creative and entrepreneurial work despite their complexity, but because of it. And this makes sense because when we look at elementary science, one of the first things that we're taught is that energy exists in the opposites, and potential energy is defined by the amount of stress, distance, discord, chaos, or tension in a system. And any system that is too stable or orderly will lack the potential energy needed to catalyze the creative process. This is why we understand that energy exists between proton and electron, anode and cathode, red wire, blue wire, North Pole and South Pole. And interestingly, when we look at psychology and psychiatry, we see a similar sentiment. In the words of the late psychiatrist Carl Jung, there is no energy unless there is a tension of opposites, and the greater the tension, the greater the potential. But one thing that we also know from science is that when a system is too complicated, too chaotic, it has too much potential, and it has no pressure release valve, it has no on-off switch, it has no way of regulating the output, it will attempt to discharge that potential through rather unproductive means like radiation. And I began to wonder if perhaps the same is true for creators, if their complexity is the source of their potential, but it is also the very thing that burns them. And I know this because I lived it. Another thing happened when I was working in venture capital. I started to wade into my own deep, dark night of the soul. All of a sudden, my greatest, brightest strengths, for which I had always been so celebrated and praised, started to self-combust and backfire. My desire to achieve warped into exhausted hypercompetitiveness, my intuition into overwhelm, my openness to experience into distraction and fear of commitment, my passion into obsession, confidence into arrogance, charisma into inauthenticity, and my desire to self-actualize into a crisis of meaning. I started to struggle with my mental health, ping-ponging back and forth between periods of low energy and apathy and periods of high energy and enthusiasm without the ability to regulate the two. I literally stopped sleeping at night, and whenever I could, I no longer dreamt with the vividness that I once had. And I also started to manifest a colorful assortment of physical symptoms, including, perhaps most interestingly, my hair. For some unknown reason, on some not so special day, my long golden hair just started to fall. And I went to doctor after doctor and healer after healer, and the best advice I got was, "You're just a high potential young woman who's a little stressed." But meanwhile, I felt like I had wandered a million miles into the dark forest, and I had no idea where I left the breadcrumbs. I was a creator interrupted. But, as the Zen proverb goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And my teacher, the first of what would turn out to be many, appeared in the form of an old dead white dude. And the man on the screen, William James, has since become a dear mentor of mine from beyond. And James's work started to find me in that funny way that books start falling off of shelves and synchronicities start happening when there's something that you're ready to learn. And the first teaching of James's that found me was his lecture on the difference between once-born souls and twice-born souls. Once-born souls are those among us who preach a sky-blue, optimistic gospel. They view the world through rose-tinted lenses and have a childlike innocence about them. They don't care much for the flaws and imperfections in themselves and the world around them, and as a result, the world is a hospitable place for them. But quite in contrast, there are the twice-born souls, those who live on the darker side of their misery threshold. For them, the world is a double-storied mystery, and as if there are multiple selves at war within their being. They are plagued by conflicting and contrasting thoughts, desires, feelings, and emotions, and they are acutely aware of the flaws and imperfections in themselves and the world around them. Now, James believed that these individuals are those with most of a destiny. They are those who are most likely to go out into the world and to use that complexity and that internal fidgeting to create a life that is better for themselves and for those around them. But he also called these individuals the sick souls because they are those who are most prone to afflictions of mind, body, and spirit and must often traverse a dark night of the soul before they can truly learn to hold and harness their multitudes. But that on the other side of this dark night is not just a mere reversion to health as the individual knew it before, but a true rebirth of the individual into a wider and deeper way of being. And so, upon hearing this, every fiber of my being lit up with an electric resonance. I felt seen, I felt understood, I felt vindicated. I was washed with a wave of self-compassion and self-love as I realized that maybe I'm not bad or broken. Maybe I'm just a twice-born learning to manage her multitudes. Maybe I'm just wired this way. Shortly after having that personal epiphany, I had a second epiphany, which was that perhaps all of the distress and disease I had witnessed within the entrepreneurial and creative ecosystem was not a result of anybody being bad or broken, and it most certainly wasn't a result of a crisis or a plague, as the media was wont to tell us, but instead was a result of it being an ecosystem that was full to the brim with twice-born souls. It occurred to me that the individuals who are self-selecting into creative and entrepreneurial work are those twice-born souls, those who are not willing to accept the status quo, those who want to grow into their potentialities that they are so acutely aware of. And so, yes, of course, we will have an ecosystem that is prone to struggling, but only until these creators can learn to manage their multitudes. And so with this awareness, I set off on a little bit of a heroine's journey, largely in an attempt to better understand myself, but in doing so, to hopefully shine a light on the journey of the complex creator. I started by looking at the common personality characteristics, the states and traits that are common among entrepreneurs and creators. And I kind of had to laugh at what I found, because on the light side, we see the qualities that land us on 30 under 30 lists and TEDx stages. What I became aware of was a through line connecting the light and dark qualities. Each light quality went hand in hand with an equal and opposite dark quality. What emerged was this quite literal two-sided coin or double-edged sword, that the dark and the light emerged from the same foundation of being. I then went a step deeper, and I started to look at the common mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges among creators. And while I'm quite aware of the dark side of many of the conditions on this screen, what I wasn't as aware of was the absolutely invaluable, essential light qualities that go hand in hand with each of these diagnoses as well. And to be clear, this slide is to not downgrade the suffering that's very real with many of these diagnoses, but is instead to encourage you to take a closer look at those parts of yourself that you're so quick to shame. Because when we look at the individual with depression, we can choose to see someone who's capable of slowing down their energy, withdrawing from the world, and channeling their focused analytical thinking, you can call it rumination, on solving a problem of their choosing, like writing a book or solving a complex business problem, a rather essential quality, no? When we look at addiction, we can choose to see someone who's wired for novelty seeking and sensation seeking and risk tolerance and passion and love and commitment, without which tendencies the individual creator likely wouldn't have the stomach to tolerate the rocky road that is new venture creation. And even when we look at something like stress-related illness, something that might seem unequivocally bad, we might be surprised to learn that researchers have found that the individuals who are most prone to physiological illness are those with high IQs. The reason for this being they're hyper-vigilant, overly sensitive, always perceiving, constantly receiving nervous systems. They have nervous systems that are made of gossamer, made of lace. They're connecting every dot and picking up on every trend and seeing the patterns that are invisible to others. And so, yes, of course, our nervous systems will be run raw from time to time from that state of hyper-awareness. But if we could choose to change these things about ourselves, I can't help but think that we wouldn't. And this brings to mind a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche: "Careful, lest in casting out your demons, you exercise the best thing in you." And so, this brings the question, how do we manage our multitudes? How do we harness our potential without being burned by it? And the answer may either inspire you or frustrate you. Carl Jung would call it integration. William James and the alchemists would call it unification. But no matter what you call it, the meaning is the same, which is that we must embark upon a process of merging the multitudes, of unifying the opposites, of coming to see the light and the dark as part of the same wholeness of self. The alchemists had a very clever way of looking at the power and the potential that was found in opposites. And they believed that by fusing two opposites in the elemental world, by fusing sulfur and mercury, you could make gold. Similarly, they believed that by fusing opposites in the human experience, by fusing the light and the dark, you could achieve psychological perfection. They called this magnum opus, or the great work. Now, unfortunately, there is no 3-step cure or 30-day workshop or 20-minute TEDx talk that can teach you how to integrate the self. But for the sake of leaving you with something, I'd like to share 3 stages that I've seen across traditions that I've studied. The first tradition usually involves something along the lines of self-understanding, being willing to come face to face with our darkness, toe to toe with our demons, becoming a student of the self with the intention of deep and honest understanding. The alchemists would call this the blackening stage, literally reducing the self to ashes. And the second stage is typically something along the lines of self-acceptance, because inevitably what happens when we embark upon the journey of self-understanding is we uncover aspects of ourselves that are inconvenient to the extreme. And so with this, we must meet ourselves with incredible self-compassion and self-acceptance so that we may begin to welcome the light and the dark into the same wholeness of self. The alchemists would call this the whitening stage. Finally, we may begin a process of self-transformation. We may use this new learning, this transformed aspect of self to write that book or to create that company or to launch that movement. The alchemists would call this the reddening stage. It's literally the creation of the philosopher's stone. To end on a humble note, when I first started coming to these awarenesses about light and dark and energy and integration, I swear I thought I was coming up with something brand new. I thought I had discovered something, and then I began researching it, and I realized how deluded I am because these concepts exist across time and culture. They are ancient, and they are steeped in archetypal wisdom. And different cultures have different names for it, whether you call it light and dark, or yin and yang, masculine, feminine, sun and moon, heaven, hell, anima, animus, right brain, left brain, head and heart. It all means the same thing, which is that in all of us, there exist multitudes. And the purpose of being a creator is not to cut ourselves off from any of it, but to learn to create with our whole selves. If I leave you with only one feeling, I hope it would be comfort. Comfort in knowing you're not bad or broken. Comfort in knowing that even if along the journey of self-discovery you lose your metaphorical hair, you'll recover and it'll grow back. Comfort in knowing you have everything you need inside of you. And comfort in knowing you're just wired this way. Thank you.